Good morning. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you all back to yet another edition of our Sunday webinar. Today's topic is Beyond Unconscious Self-Deception. I want to thank each one of you for tuning in, for joining us on the live webinar, as well as those of you who might take time off from your busy lives to take a look at the recording and to listen to the message. So, as in keeping with intellectual and spiritual honesty, I would like to indicate a source from where most of what I'm going to be presenting today is inspired by, and it is the Book of Secrets by Osho. 112 meditations to discover the mystery within. For those of us who like techniques, this is an excellent book. Although the size of the book may appear formidable and daunting, I would say that it's very easy to read and it has explanations of the techniques, but also the cultural and broader background that creates a foundation for us to be able to absorb these techniques as they fall down like rain from the sky. So welcome, folks. Today's topic is Beyond Unconscious Self-Deception. And I didn't expect many people to join a session on unconscious self-deception because, self-deception is never my problem, right? I'm never deceiving myself, but it's the others who are deceiving themselves. How many of us have heard the definition of superstition as the false beliefs of other people, right? So it's something that is very hard for us to see ourselves. And it's precisely because our mind, our beautiful, playful, and cunning mind is so good at deceiving us at every turn around the corner that we need to be particularly vigilant about uh, overcoming and transcending the self-deceptions, because often the self-deception is like a plastic flower. You may have a plastic rose that adorns your desk, and that might be a perfect thing, but it's not the same as a real rose. So beyond unconscious self-deception is enhancing and enriching our ability to take us beyond the false plastic roses in our being, to discovering the real fragrance of our inner being, the truth of our inner being. And sometimes our being, when seen in all its nudity, with all its warts and all its blemishes, is actually more beautiful than a highly decorated being if it has been decorated by layers of self-deception. There is something to the naturalness of beauty, and it's almost like the beauty of a nicely manicured lawn versus the beauty of a wild forest, right? Both are beautiful, and our ability to embrace the wild forest enables us to also appreciate how our own being can seem like a wild forest. Often, we are not living in a universe, we are living in a multiverse. There are so many voices within us. Sometimes those voices are pulling in opposite directions. And for us to be able to look within and to celebrate whatever it is that we see, whether it looks beautiful and aesthetically appealing to the eye, or whether it appears ugly and unesthetically appealing to the eye. Our emotions, our capacity to love, to hold each other in trust, to communicate, to connect, to be authentic, are just as beautiful as the hate, the jealousy, the possessiveness, the anger, and all of these emotions. And if we have a differential valuing where we say one is good and the other is bad, and we condemn those sides of us that we don't really want, if we become perfectionists, spiritual perfectionists who say that I want only the heights, the part of me that's a Christ or a Buddha is what I want to celebrate, not the part of me that's has fallen. I don't appreciate that. No, it's not just the leaves on a high tree that are beautiful. Even the leaf, when it falls to the ground, and when the leaves that are green have turned into brown, as Simon and Garfunkel say, when they adorn our driveways and our backyards, to be able to see beauty in the dry leaf on the ground, and to be able to see beauty in the lush green leaf on the tree. When we get to that equivalent of that state in looking at ourselves, all of a sudden we become awakened to a new appreciation of our inner beauty. And that's what we are here today to celebrate and to talk about. So first, a few introductory points. I want to call attention to what Osho describes as a difference between spiritual practices and traditions that treat spiritual awakening as an attainment, as an accomplishment, versus those that treat spiritual attainment not as an accomplishment, but as a discovery. Now, this seems like a minor difference, but it is vast. So the traditions that say it's an attainment may require you to put in a lot of arduous work over several years because we are told that spiritual attainment doesn't come easily. We put in undertake an arduous journey, and as a result of the arduous journey, you get to this place of spiritual accomplishment. Now, there are other traditions that say, no, it's not an attainment. You are already a spiritually perfect being. You are perfect as you are. So it's not a matter of taking an arduous journey, but it is a matter of clearing the dust that has covered the lamp, so that when the lamp is covered with dust and you clean it, your lamp will again begin to glow. And it's a matter of cleaning the mirror, cleaning the dust. It's a matter of discovering the divinity within you, the sacredness within you. And in all cultural and religious traditions, we've had parables that talk about how what is most divine in us is within. And that's something we are likely to not pay attention to because our senses are pointed outward. So we tend to pursue things outside without waking up to the treasures, to the hidden treasure that is within. Now, Osho would encourage us to embrace the idea of spiritual attainment as a discovery, because what he says is there are many simple techniques. They seem so simple, you would say that's absurd. But Osho reminds us that many of these techniques can awaken in us a deep spiritual consciousness, an ability to embrace ourselves and to dance with the vicissitudes of life. But if we have already a mental model that spiritual journey has to take years and you have to go to the mountains, you're not likely to take these techniques seriously because you'll say, how can it be so simple? Right? For example, I want to give you an example of a technique that seems so simple on the surface. It is, he says, you breathe in and you feel the breath going in, and then the point where it turns around and the outgoing breath, the incoming breath, the turn, and the outgoing breath. Now, you might say, Param, you are stupid if you think that that can take me to enlightenment. But then he looks at this in terms of how you actually practice it. And he reminds us that we are never feeling the breath going in. We are never actually experiencing the breath. What we are experiencing is the passage of the breath. The passage of the breath is when the air enters the nostrils, you feel that your nostrils are experiencing the breath. It's moving right through the nostril and your passage. We may be experiencing the passage, but not the breath itself. And it took Buddha 6 years to just get to that point where you could actually experience the breath, which is prana, the life force going within you. Now, there are many beautiful techniques like this that Osho discusses in his book of secrets that seem disarmingly simple. But when you really take it on and you refine it, you begin to understand how and why. And the beauty of the book is that he explains how these techniques work, not just tell you to take the breath in and become conscious of it and then follow the outgoing breath and watch the turning point, but to understand how that very simple technique has got deep roots into the soil of your consciousness that makes many things possible. So he says, we wear clothes, and our clothes are like our personality. But our true spirituality is our naked body hidden under these layers. And so what happens often is, and you've heard of this metaphor before, is that you've heard of this parable before, of Rabia's parable, where she has lost a needle and she starts looking outside under a street light for the needle. And many people join her in this beautiful Sufi parable, trying to help her find the needle. And they ask her eventually, where exactly did you lose the needle? She says, I lost it inside the house. So these people are bewildered. If you lost the needle inside the house, why are you wasting your time and our time looking for that needle under the street lamp? She says, because the light is here. Inside it is dark. How would I find the needle? Now, Rabia was a very advanced Sufi mystic, and her message to the people of the village was clear, that that's not just not what I'm doing, that's what all of you are doing. You're looking outward for what you should be looking inside your own being where it is there. Because when you go in your own being, you seem to see darkness. And there is light outside, so naturally all your senses are taking you outward into the world while you're missing the hidden treasure that is there within. The other idea, as a corollary to the attainment versus discovery idea, is that imagine, he says, you see a beggar on the street and you see an emperor. Normally we think, my goodness, what a vast distance separates the beggar and the emperor. So from a worldly perspective, how does the beggar become an emperor? He has to keep accumulating a lot of wealth. He has to conquer the world, and then he becomes an emperor. So can you see how that process is an arduous journey? But in the spiritual realm, as Osho describes it, it is not such an arduous journey. It can happen in an instant. Because being a beggar and being an emperor is not a matter of how much you have accumulated. It is a matter of your approach to life. If a millionaire is going around with a begging bowl, still dissatisfied with his millions and asking the universe and asking God to give him billions, how many of you can see, raise your hand if you can see that that millionaire is actually a beggar, right? It is a state of consciousness. And similarly, if a beggar has discovered the treasure within, the hidden treasure of his own being, and he's awakened to the miracle of existence, how many of you can see that the beggar himself has become an emperor in that instant? And that is an instantaneous shift. And the beauty of the Eastern mystical traditions is that they don't require you to undertake a long journey of many distance. You know how it is for people, we will travel to the Himalayas, we will travel far and wide in search of spiritual enlightenment. The truly enlightened masters of the East have said that shift, that aha, that jump, that leap, that quantum leap can be attained sitting in your bedroom. There is no need. You could travel to the Himalayas and come back without having achieved that flash of insight. Or you can be sitting in your bedroom and loving your cat, looking lovingly upon your beautiful cat, sleeping on your lap. You can have an awakening. And that's something for us to be aware of. It is, and as Osho would remind us, often it is the effort that we put in, the tension that we suffer. Will I achieve or not achieve? How many of you have known the tension that sometimes grips us when we see we are here and the goal is very far away, and you say, will I reach that goal or not? And that goal could be anything. Whenever we set up a goal, immediately your body and your spirit and your being goes into tension. It goes into effort. There is the longing, the desire to achieve the goal, the preoccupation with it, the expectation, the idea that if I attain the goal, I will be happy. Otherwise, I will not be happy. Instantaneously, the free human being has transformed into himself into an enslaved human being because the goal has made a slave out of him. Now the goal is going to dictate whether, he's happy or unhappy. And this happens to us. And therefore, many traditions like Taoism have extolled what is called effortless effort. Because in effortless effort, you're not really making effort. Well, you're sincere, but you're not necessarily expending a lot of effort, creating expectations, longing, tension, because the desire is the barrier. And one of the challenges is that it's not just desires, says Osho, it's not just material desires. Your material desires, it's easy to see how they take away our ability to be happy. If I have a material desire to be a millionaire, until I'm a millionaire or unless I'm a millionaire, I'm going to be submerged in my unhappiness. But it's not just the material desires, it's the spiritual desires too. When will I attain enlightenment? Will I attain moksha? All of these desires that take us away, farther and farther away from the magic and the miracle of this moment. How can I appreciate the beauty of the human being who is with me in this moment, sharing his or her heart with me, if I am focused not just on this life, but the life beyond? If I am worried about attaining moksha, how will I then simultaneously be able to be fully with this person? Now, some people might be able to do it, but for many of us, it is the future and the past that become the ultimate distraction from the miracle and magic of the present. The other thing for us to be aware of, and now I'm going to run through a few points, and as you know, with these webinars, there is no knowing how many of them we will run through. So, but I'll try to run through a few points, see each of these as a seed that I'm tossing into the soil, right? Some of them may take root and grow, and others of them may not. So one of the things in what? In our journey to get beyond unconscious self-deception. How do we go beyond unconscious self-deception? Sometimes we have to prepare a soil, the soil of our own consciousness to be able to undertake that shift. So one of the things to know is to know that there are layers of awareness within us. And this is something that really hit me when I was reading this in the book of Secrets. When two people embrace, imagine two people embracing, you are embracing your lover. We are never aware of the love. We are only usually aware of the loving movement as expressed through the body. Do you see that love is a multi-layered experience? If I hug somebody, if I embrace somebody, there is the touching of the bodies, the meeting of the bodies. So love is expressed as a physical phenomenon. If I use words to say, I love you, now it has become a mental phenomenon. Now, if I feel some love towards that person, it has become a feeling-based phenomenon. Look at a simple embrace between two lovers, the beauty and the complexity of that moment. There's a physical love that is being expressed through a bodily movement. There is a mental love that is expressed through the word love that comes up when the embrace happens or the kiss happens. Then there is the feeling-based love that happens when you feel tenderness. But beyond all this is the real love. It is not a bodily feeling alone. It is not a mental feeling alone. It is not an emotional feeling alone. It is something that transcends all of these levels. Because how can you take something as ubiquitous, as pervasive, as cosmic as love itself and trap it? If we think we can encage it at the level of the body, at the level of the mind, or at the level of the heart, that is self-deception. We have to set that bird free. And we have to be aware of the mystery that that force of love is. What does it mean? How can we become aware of the love? If I were to embrace somebody and somebody embraces me, can I become aware of their love beyond the layers that I'm accustomed to, relating to? Another posture, if you will, a stance that we can take towards reality that helps us get beyond self-deception, says Osho, is to recognize that in reality, there is no problem. Now that seems so strange. Don't we know there are so many problems? How many of you would agree by raising of hands that probably if I were to ask you to list the problems, you will probably be able to put down at least 5 to 10 right now, this very moment, right? So we think we have so many problems. Osho reminds us, in mind there are problems, and if you look at reality through the mind, the reality becomes problematic. So it is not that reality has problems. Reality is just there. Our mind has problems. And if we look at reality through the lens of the mind, all we see is problems. Like, for example, if my lenses are cracked, and I wear them and I try to look at a painting or a mirror, the mirror is going to look cracked to me. The mirror is not cracked. The lake is going to look cracked to me. The sky will look cracked to me. The crack is in the lenses. And this is an example of self-deception because the mind is what causes the self-deception. In reality, there are no problems. And yet, we see so many problems because we are looking at reality through the mind, through the prism of the mind, and the mind makes it all problematic. The mind works like a prison. It divides and creates problems. And the beauty of it all, as Osho reminds us, is that not only do we create our problems, our mind will give us solutions. This is the problem. So this has to be the solution. And these solutions become deeper problems. How many of you have known a situation you believed where you had a problem and your mind said it's a problem? Perhaps there was no problem. And then your mind said this is the solution. And the mind convinced you that's the solution. You acted on the solution, and that solution became an even deeper problem. How many of you have known that experience in life? Raise your hand. And so it is that our today's problems beget solutions which become tomorrow's problems. And so Osho says one of the ways of rising above self-deception is to know that your look, the way you're looking at something, the way you're gazing at life, is that life is a problem. Your mind has all these problems, and then it starts creating problems. There's another simple tool that Osho gives us in terms of getting beyond the deception. So I want to share this with you. And this technique is more like, how you can sometimes go from darkness to light suddenly, but sometimes, like with a dimmer, you can keep raising the level of lighting slowly, incrementally. So some things that are clearly visible will become visible in the room, but the level of light may not be enough. You raise the light a little more, raise it a little more, and all of a sudden, intricate details in the room that you might otherwise have missed will become visible to you. And so it is with consciousness, with awareness. So he draws a distinction, as many Eastern mystics do, between attention and awareness. Attention implies concentration. You're concentrating on something. Awareness implies a more diffused state. Awareness is inclusive. Attention is exclusive. For example, I have a number of people on the Zoom screen right now, and I can see you, but I can decide to just concentrate on my own face. Now, if I'm paying attention only to my face, I'm not aware of anybody else. I'm just concentrating, focusing attention on my face. Now I can become even narrower. I can start focusing attention only on my eyes. Now my nose has disappeared, my forehead has disappeared. I'm only paying attention on my eyes. So notice that attention is a progressive narrowing of the field, that I start becoming narrower and narrower till I focus on one thing. That's the process of attention. The process of awareness is precisely the opposite. I start going in reverse gear. So from focusing on my eyes, I start including my nose, I start including my mouth, my beard, my face, now my whole face. And then I say, I'm going to expand my awareness. So I'm not just focusing on myself, I'm aware of everybody else. Now I have made my perception and my experience of reality more inclusive. Now, Osho talks about a technique where we begin with focusing on something. And the best way to begin is to start focusing on your own breath. The experience or the passage of the breath going in, turning, coming out. Now, if we do this for an hour, just focusing on the breath, we will be very attuned to and fully attentive to the breathing. But we would have dimmed our awareness of everything else because this is a moment of deep yogic concentration. Now, gradually, he says, start adding other activities. Try to be attentive to the breath, but also to include consciously walking. Now, you're not doing one thing, but you're doing two things. You're breathing, you're being aware of the breath, and you're walking, and you're aware of walking. Then, perhaps, you can add more and more activities incrementally and gradually to the point that a kind of a ongoing awareness becomes an integral part of how you're experiencing life, an ongoing consciousness. You're no longer sleepwalking through life like a robot, like a mechanical robot. All of a sudden, your awareness has started to be like a silent flame that is always burning at the back. It's almost like you have a fireplace in your house, the fireplace of your awareness that is always lit. You have a lamp in your house, an earthen lamp that is always lit with the lamp of awareness. So wherever you go and whatever you do, you will be conscious. Now, that is the precise antithesis of how we normally live life. How many of you are aware that our normal way of living life is to, as Osho describes, you get into a car, you drive to a destination 30 minutes away. If I were to ask you how you got there, you wouldn't even be aware of how you got there, because we are living our life unconsciously. And in that state, years of our lives are going to just vanish before our very eyes. And one of the ways to slow this process down, to slow our experience of reality, to be able to experience reality more fully, would be to start preserving that awareness, that consciousness, as often as we can. And as the Zen masters would say, remind yourself 5 or 6 times a day, Param, are you awake? And then answer the question to yourself, yes, I'm awake. Oh no, I had just fallen asleep. I was sleepwalking in the last 2 hours, getting so much done, I had become a robot. These constant reminders where we start expanding, that light of awareness that we are always aware. Now, you might say, what does that have to do with self-deception? Well, I'm not going to give you an intellectual argument, but how many of you can feel this, that if you are maintaining the lamp of awareness consciously, it is always lit, you're less likely to be blindsided by self-deception. Raise your hand if you can see the connection, the organic connection between maintaining constant awareness and overcoming self-deception. So part of the challenge of the mind, he says, is that your mind is not yours. You know how carefully we protect our mind? We try to nurture it. In fact, we are always using it. We imagine problems. The mind imagines its problems, and the mind creates new solutions. And these solutions put us into deeper problems. This goes on. For us to become fully aware on a day-to-day basis, how much of what we see in the world is a result of conditioning? It is all conditioning. Notice how many of you would see that if you were to see something like a dog or a cat being abused, you would feel tremendous anger and angst and at that sight of a dog or a pet being abused. But how many of you know that you may feel nothing at all when you eat a beef sandwich or a chicken sandwich? Can you imagine how much that poor animal has been abused at that point? Like somebody came to it and there was that fraction of a second where it felt the deep pain of slaughter as the knife, and at least in the old butcher houses and not the factory farms, the death implied a relationship between the animal and a butcher who killed it. There was 2 souls. Naturally, one soul was acting violently upon another soul, but at least it was a soul-to-soul experience. What happens in our factory farms from where we consume all our meat is that there will be a machine that will be chopping off the chicken's head, the cow, slices, everything is mechanized. And even death, the experience of death has lost its sacredness as it is inflicted and delivered by a robot. But notice how our mind is conditioned to feel compassion for a dog or cat, and perhaps feel no compassion at all for the cow or the chicken. And that is where these forms of self-deception enable us to continue, by adjusting to society. And what Osho reminds us is that a lot of Western psychology has been about having you become adjusted to society. So if you're adjusted to your society and your mind is functioning in a rational and logical way, you're considered to be a well-adjusted person, and the psychologist has no business with you. Whereas the Eastern psychology has taken a very different view. It says that the society at any point in time, as we know, even present society, historically, sometimes it's very hard to see how the present civilization is sick. It is very easy to see how, the medieval ages, people were so primitive and barbaric and sick, right? But the people living in the medieval ages could not see that they would be viewed as primitive, barbaric, and sick. But forms of barbarism and inhumanity and cruelty that persist and all of that, it's all there, but we may not be able to necessarily see it because our mind has said, this is okay, this is not okay. and in that. And therefore, what Osho talks about is that in Eastern psychology, the standard or the criterion of emotional and spiritual well-being or mental health is not given by the healthy, logical, rational mind. It is not given by how well you're adjusted to a society. It goes beyond that to say it is all about your being. To what extent are you emanating or functioning from a state of loving consciousness? To what extent are you feeling and seeing the sacred and divine in all beings? To what extent is a tree not just a tree? That you're able to see beauty, you're able to see the pulsating, sentient nature of the plants and the animals and all of that. It's a different standard. The health of the being maybe is very different from the health of the mind. The health of the mind is just an adjustment to society. The health of the being is society transcendent, time transcendent. It concerns the time transcendent, whatever is life flourishing, life supporting. And the reason I bring you this is because in so many ways, we are conditioned and we allow ourselves only to see what we have been taught. Osho reminds us that in order to get beyond self-deception, you have to understand that the mind only brings up the past. Like, for example, I gave you this example once before. I could say, you know what? My mind is so original. I can conjure up golden horses flying in the sky. How exotic. Osho would remind us that all that the mind is doing, it is taking memories of the past and connecting them in different ways. It is never capable of seeing anything new, producing anything original. All of a sudden, the concept of horses is from the past. The concept of gold is from the past. The concept of flying is from the past. Everything the mind sees is from the past. And therefore, beyond unconscious self-deception is an invitation to go beyond the mind, to explore other layers of consciousness. And here is where I want to leave you with the concluding thought, and I know we are out of time, of how the inward journey is like peeling an onion, says Osho. You start peeling layers and layers of that onion, and ultimately you're left with nothing. And so it is as we peel off layers and layers of masks that we are wearing, of personality, of values that we have inherited, of beliefs that we have absorbed, from our parents and others. Truly, you get to just pure consciousness, that space. But at that deepest level, who we are is literally nothing. It is pure emptiness. And Osho says, and as do so many other Eastern traditions, that encounter with nothingness, that encounter with what is called the shunya, the zero, the emptiness, the nothingness, the space within, where you are encountering a spiritual death because you don't exist at that level as an I. You exist just as the sky. That encounter is so scary, so frightening. That is why we resort to all manner of self-deceptions, because the deceptions keep us distracted, prevent us from having to confront the reality that inside we are just empty and nothing. Why? Because we have been trained to fear empty and nothing, not to see empty and nothing, not as an absence, but as a beautiful presence of infinite possibility. If there is an empty house, it's a presence of infinite possibility. If there's a house that's full of furniture, how much is possible in that house? It has already been designed, it has already been made. So to be able to celebrate space as infinite possibility, because until we overcome that fear, anything that we do will be self-deception. Because until we overcome that fear, anything we do will be an expression of our ego, will be an expression of our mind, trying to keep the I, the sense of I, alive and kicking. So to actually be loving and accepting of the fear that you have, because naturally, imagine, I spent all these years decorating myself with so many theories and knowledge. What's so scary if I have to then sit back after a few days of meditation and discover that who I am is nothing, who I am is pure emptiness, it's pure consciousness and just the sky. Seems scary. So I must have great compassion for myself for being afraid of that. because the letters after my name may give me security and I may not be ready for that security to be taken away. But just becoming aware of that and to know that that experience of emptiness and nothingness is so scary, just to be aware of our fear is itself taking the first step beyond self-deception. And getting beyond self-deception can be just that first step, being aware of our inner fears and accepting our fears and having compassion for our fears is itself the first step. And sometimes the journey of 1,000 miles, as Lao Tzu said, has to begin with one step. Finally, folks, I want to end with a quote from Osho from the Book of Secrets. You are not to go anywhere else. You are to go into yourself. And the going is possible this very moment. If you can put aside your mind, you enter here and now. And energy, and he talks about how electricity is an energy. Sometimes it is used in the electric fan, sometimes it's used in the stereo, sometimes to fire up a computer, sometimes to fire up a vacuum cleaner. We have deployed our energy in different ways here. There is love, somebody you love, somebody you hate, somebody you're jealous of, somebody you absolutely adore. So there are all these ways we have deployed our energies. But he says, rather than focus on the object of the energy, so if I love you, rather than focus on you or focus on what I hate, if I hate you, go back, he says, follow that energy inward. Don't focus on the object. Forget about the other person. Forget about the other person. Instead, follow the energy inward. Let it go in. Go into the source. Discover what the source is. If I'm angry at you, I can be angry at you and keep focusing on you, or I can follow the anger and become interested in where is that anger coming from? What is the source of that anger? That anger was not there until you walked into the room and insulted me. I seem to be perfectly at peace. The moment you walked in, the anger has come. Where did it come? That is the mysterious inward journey. It's called going back to the source. In future webinars, we'll continue to explore some of these questions of what does going back to the source look like, feel like. Folks, I want to declare the end of the first phase of the webinar, and I'm sorry I've gone over time a little bit today. I apologize for keeping you on. As you know, the way the format that we have developed is that sometime between 30 to 40 minutes, there's a presentation, and then we bring the curtain down on that phase. You're free to leave and exit at that point. Of course, you're free to leave at any time, but particularly at this point, you might say, okay, I'm done. But if you choose to stay with us, till about 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my watch, should be looking at my cell phone or my computer clock, till about 3 o'clock. So we have about 20 minutes or so of just interaction, of sharing stories, asking questions. So you're free to stay, welcome to stay. If you stay, it would be lovely to see you. So it would be lovely if you can turn on your camera so we can become a little community. But if it's not inconvenient for you to turn on your camera, by all means, whatever is comfortable to you. I want to invite Clyde. He has his hand raised, and I'd love to hear Clyde share with us.
You made two very interesting points that helps cure